Usually, whenever I cover the subject of karma, there are many questions, but unfortunately, due to lack of moderator, we are not able to receive nor discuss these questions. But at the best, I have tried to see the questions that have been posted on Facebook. And based on the questions on Facebook, I would like to answer a few questions before I continue. One of the questions that was asked is that, how can I get rid of your karma? How can I get rid of my karma? And this question has been repeatedly discussed in the various sessions I've conducted on the law of karma. And essentially, all karma is connected to self. And when you begin to act selflessly, when you begin to act in remembrance of God and in forgetfulness of self, when you begin to act without acting self-centeredly or selfishly, then your actions become free from karma. So the same action which you do with the idea of self, I, me, myself, I, me, mine, and myself, will incur karma. But the same action which you perform as a sacrifice to please God is free of karma. So this is one excellent way by which you can get rid of, first of all, creating fresh karma. Because there's no point in trying to get rid of the past karma if you're continuously creating fresh and new karma. So the Bhagavad Gita says, Yagnarthart karmano nyatra loko yam karma bandhana tadartham karma kaunteya mukta sangha samachara. All actions you do which are offered as a sacrifice to God, these actions are free from karma, whereas all other actions bind you to karma. So perform all actions for God. And Krishna says all means all. Yat karoshi, yad ashnasi, yat johosi, dadasi, yat tapasyasi kaunteya tat kurushoma darpanam. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer, whatever you give away, whatever charities and whatever austerities you perform, do it for me. And if you act in that way, Krishna calls it sannyas yoga. So he says, Shubha ashubha falairevam moksha se karma bandhane. If you act in this way, you will become free from all bondage of karma. And sannyasa yoga yuktena vimukto mam evishyasi. And acting in this way continuously in a spirit of self-sacrifice, you will attain salvation and reunion with God. So that's it. So first of all, perform all actions and only those actions which are your duty, which are your obligation, and which are performed as a sacrifice to please God, without any desire for fruit, and very importantly, without considering yourself to be the doer of the activities. The second question is, well, if I stop performing fresh karma, what do I do about present karma? So when you act in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion to God, when your mind is on God, when your mind is on Krishna, and it is in forgetfulness of self, then all the slings and arrows, all the misfortunes that come your way will not affect you as much as they would if you thought of yourself. So your suffering will automatically become less, because as you act in this spirit of sacrifice and devotion to God, what happens is that your mind is conquered by God Himself. And since your mind is transcended, conquered, surrendered to God, as Krishna says in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Jitatmana prashantasya paramatmaha samahitah sitoshina sukhadukheshu tatha manah panayu. For one who has conquered his mind, for him God is already reached. For him heat and cold, joy and sorrow, honor and dishonor, they are all the same. You reach that platform of what is known as Sthita Prajna, which is not an all or nothing phenomenon, but with each advance that you make, you will become increasingly more tolerant and you will become increasingly more invulnerable to the sufferings of this world. You will become much more and more of a Sthita Prajna. So in the Bhagavad Gita, 2nd chapter, Krishna describes the Sthita Prajna and he says, Dukheshu anudvigna mana sukheshu vigata spriha vitaraga bhaya krodha sthitadi muni uchyate. Where Krishna says that this person who is a Sthita Prajna is not depressed when there's cause for sorrow, he is not excited when there's cause for joy, he is free from attachment, fear and anger. Such is the sage of steady wisdom. The third question is, well, you told us how not to perform fresh karma. You've told us how being dedicated to God will reduce our suffering from the prarabdha that we are experiencing. And what about the sanchit karma, the seed karmas that are lying, waiting to sprout? Those seeds that may sprout tomorrow, day after, this life, next life. What about those? And the answer is that these seed karmas are an integral part of your subtle body. And being an integral part of your subtle body, this bundle of karmas accompanies you from life after life, from one physical womb to another physical womb. And the only way that one can bring about dissolution and inactivation and annihilation of these karmas is by chanting God's name. When you constantly chant God's name, your sense of self becomes at first weakened, attenuated, transcended, surrendered, and eventually annihilated. And this sense of self is what keeps this karma as part of you. With the dissolution of self, there is also dissolution or inactivation of the karmic bundle which you carry with you from birth after birth. So, to give you an example, one person after hearing my lectures came and told me, he says that, you told me that I should always chant God's name when I am not otherwise engaged in doing activities and duties. So I've been coming to your lectures and I travel all the way, nearly 1 hour's travel to my place of residence after the lectures. And I travel in the local train. So I was sitting in the local train and I was with my eyes closed, I was chanting my name. And suddenly I was disturbed and awakened by somebody who was roughly speaking to me. And that man said, Sala baap ka train hai kya? And I saw that this man wanted to sit on the seat opposite me where I'd kept my feet. That man started abusing me. So he says, Doctor, you don't know what I am. I'm a very fierce, angry person. I carry with me the seeds of anger. And these seeds of anger are so furious, I always get into fights. and I get into physical violence with people. And typically what I would have done is I would have said, "Ha, mera baap ka train hai, utar ja." And I would have fought with him and tried to throw him off the train. But I was chanting God's name, and I'd forgotten this self, which was full of these seeds of anger, the Sanchit karma. And I just opened my eyes, I folded my hands, I said, "Maaf karo," put my feet down from that seat, took my handkerchief and cleaned that seat. And I said, "Please excuse me, do sit down." And then I closed my eyes and I began chanting again. I said, "What happened to me? Why did I behave like that? I know this is not my normal behavior. I know that I am full of seeds of anger and rage. I know that I am a Mawali. I know that I am a Gunda. And I know that I am driven to fight after fight, violence after violence." I said, "You carry within you, as a result of your past karma, the prarabdha of all the seeds of violence and anger. But because you were absorbed in God, something was happening within you. You see, all seeds, they sprout when you plant them. All seeds, they wait for the right opportunity, for the right climate, for the rain to fall, for the earth to help the seeds to manifest. But what really happened was that seeds do not sprout when they are roasted on the flame. Once you roast the seeds on the fire, the seeds do not sprout. So similarly, the seeds of your prarabdha, the sanchit karma, the seeds that are lying within you, waiting to sprout in the future, which are not yet your prarabdha but are waiting to sprout. When you chant the name of God, what happens is that automatically these seeds become inactivated. These seeds become inactivated. And when the seeds become inactivated, you do not act reflexly. You do not act out of thought, speech, and habit patterns of the past. Your pure consciousness understands the situation and it acts appropriate to the situation. So the question is, how do I deal with karma? And these are the three answers that if you act in a spirit of devotion and renunciation, then you will not create fresh karma. You will be performing acts of yoga, which will reunite you to God. The second is that if you are absorbed in God, you will become relatively immune to suffering. And because you will become immune to suffering, you will not be affected to the same extent by the miseries of the world, birth and death and old age and disease and fault and misfortune. They will affect you less and less as you progress on this path. And of course, if you are chanting God's name, if you are absorbed in God, then that fire of God realization is burning within you. And that will inactivate the seeds that could sprout and cause you, you know, even more suffering to come in the life ahead. So this is the main question that was asked and that I found. The other question that was asked was, what about astrology? What about karma and astrology? Well, to be honest with you, in the Bhagavad Gita, there is no mention of astrology at all. And since there is no mention of astrology in the Bhagavad Gita, it is certainly not appropriate for me to tell you that Bhagavad Gita talks about astrology. But if you look at it from a general perspective, astrology is Jyotishi. Jyotishi is what? Light. It is like your headlight. The idea of your headlight is to throw light in front of your vehicle so that you can see whether the road is free and you can speed up, or whether the road is crowded with people crossing, cows crossing, ditches that are lying ahead, in which case you need to slow down. So in that sense, Jyotishi or astrology is merely a light thrown in front of you in order to see what the circumstances are likely to be as a result of the star, what the stars foretell. And if you are absorbed in God, if you are chanting God's name, if you are performing your actions in a spirit of sacrifice and devotion, without considering yourself to be the doer and without seeking any fruits of your labor, then you don't need astrology. You are beyond astrology. The so-called afflictions will hardly bother you or will hardly disturb you. And you will move under the protection and the guidance of God at all times, because God is seated in your heart. Ishvara sarva bhutanam hriday deshe arjuna tistati brahmyan sarva bhutani yantraradhani maya. So God says, I am seated in your heart and I am guiding you onward towards your destiny. You are merely seated in a machine made of material energy. So when God himself is seated in your heart and he is driving you onward towards your destiny, for what do you need astrology? Because God is personally guiding you and he is available to you at all times, unlike your astrologer. So my advice would be that most of the time, intelligent people who are surrendered unto God do not necessarily need the guidance of an astrologer. And therefore, let us have no further discussion of astrology, astrologers, and Bhagavad Gita. Because Bhagavad Gita gives you a solution that transcends astrology completely. These are the important questions that I was able to relate from whatever questions were put up. But if you have any other questions, you are welcome to post them on the chat even now, and I'll be happy to take them further on this. Does anyone have any questions which they would like to post on the chat? So I'll continue and I will. So we have a question from Arvind Malya. Is chanting shloka without understanding its meaning is all right? Well, chanting shloka is, or chanting mantra. Shloka and mantra are practically, if you're talking about Bhagavad Gita, the shlokas of Bhagavad Gita, each of them are mantras in themselves. And it is said, mana trayate iti mantraha, that which protects your mind is called a mantra. So when you are chanting mantra, when you are chanting shloka, which has been spoken by God, then this chanting has got a divine sound vibration. And it is this divine sound vibration that removes impure thoughts, self-defeating thoughts, negative thoughts from your mind. And whether you understand the meaning of the shloka or mantra or not, it doesn't matter. It definitely will help you. But suppose you are chanting and you know the meaning of the mantra, then that is even better, because the meaning of the mantra and understanding what the shloka is saying will definitely give you much, much more benefit. Does karya lead to karma? I already explained this. I'm not sure if my... what do you mean by karya? All action leads to karma unless it is offered to God. All action leads to karma unless it is performed in a spirit of dedication and devotion, without any sense of doership, without seeking any fruit, with the idea Om Tat Sat being offered to God. All action, all kriya, all karya leads to karma. Does anyone else have any questions? There is one other way by which we divinize our existence. We divinize our body, and we constantly use it as a means to remember God. And that essentially is that we have to remember to offer every grain of rice, every drop of water, everything that crosses our lips. We must do it after offering it to God with love and with devotion. This is a very, very important subject, and I would like to take it up as the next subject. And the topic is You Are What You Eat. And if you divinize your food, you divinize what you drink, then that arrangement, that act of creating everything that you eat and drink into a sacrament will indeed divinize your mind and will keep you absorbed in God. So I would like to start that question. I would like to start that topic. So in the Chandogya Upanishad, there is a verse which clearly illustrates the importance of what you eat. And the Chandogya Upanishad says that of all the food that we eat, the most coarse material that we eat forms the stool. The middle coarse material that we eat goes to form our flesh. And the most subtle material that we eat goes to form our mind. So everything that you eat every day goes to form your stool when it is passed out of your body. It goes to form your flesh, that part which offers physical nutrition. And then there is a part of the food that you eat which goes to form the content of your mind. To understand that what you are eating will create the content of your mind, I'd like to share with you a very interesting experiment that was conducted in New York in state prison. And in this New York state prison, they wanted to see if the diet that they were feeding the prisoners was leading to more violence, more infarction of the prison rules, or whether it was helping them to become more peaceful and more orderly. So one group of prisoners were given the normal diet that the prisoners were given. That is, they were given meat, they were given other products of violence, and they were also given processed foods. The other group of people, same number, were given vegetarian food, and they were given food that was natural and non-processed. And at the end of 3 months, they were surprised to find that indeed those people who were fed products of violence had become indeed just like the normal population, inclined to engage in acts of violence in the prison. Indeed, they were engaged in infarction of the prison rules, and thus they were not benefited at all. Perhaps they resulted in only lengthening their sentences by breaking the rules of the prison. But those who were fed a wholesome vegetarian diet, which was nutritious, unprocessed, so these people became calmer in mind. And as they became calmer in mind, they also became less likely to break the prison rules and regulations, and thus became more eligible for early release. So I remember telling this story to a police official who was known to me. And that police official laughed and he said, ये सब एक्सपेरिमेंट करने की क्या जरूरत है? हम डेली बम्बई के स्ट्रीट्स पे हम देखते हैं. We see on the streets of Bombay that those people, those communities that are eating products of violence are inclined to engage in acts of violence. And therefore, most of the violent crime, maybe 70 to 80% of the violent crime, he says, is from that community. But on the other hand, he said, if you look at the communities that do not eat meat at all, like for example, the Jains, well, they may be involved in financial crimes, but acts of physical violence and violent crimes, they hardly figure in the statistics at all. So you might think that I eat meat, but I haven't engaged in any violent crimes. But the fact, my friends, is that if you do eat products of violence, violence will enter your life. If it doesn't enter your life in violent acts, it will enter in violent words and it will enter in violent thoughts and will definitely bring about a disturbance of life and increase in suffering. When an animal is killed, do you think the animal goes happily, peacefully, joyfully into death? Indeed, the animal that is killed in an act of violence is an animal that goes full of rage and anger and fear and sorrow and depression. And as it experiences all these emotions, all these hormones are secreted into the bloodstream. And the flesh that you eat is soaked in these hormones, soaked in that blood. So do you think then that these negative emotions will not enter your life? Of course, they must enter your life. If you examine your life very carefully on both diets, you will see that by the simple act of changing your diet, your mind can become more peaceful. You have to understand the same thing occurs even in animals. So when you have dogs, if you want to have a ferocious dog, if you want to have a dog that acts like a violent guard dog to protect your property, then that dog must be fed meat because the very amino acids that irritate the brain, which create attitudes of violence, are only contained in products of violence. Whereas if you eat vegetarian food, which is containing amino acids like serotonin, which in fact calm the mind and make you more peaceful, you will find that violence, aggression will automatically become less. Now, it's not only that it affects your mind, but eating products of violence also affects your physical body. Long, long back when President Reagan was the President of the United States, a relative of mine had come from the United States and he said that I have stopped eating red meat. So I said, I thought you loved red meat. Why have you stopped eating it? He said, because every television station in the United States is showing that Ronald Reagan had a polyp, possibly malignant, in the colon. And this was the direct result of having eaten red meat. So eating red meat increases your risk of large bowel cancer. There's no doubt about that. And eating any meat, any product of violence, in short, is well known to shorten your lifespan by as much as 8 years. Whereas it has been well established that those who eat a plant-centered diet, these people are more likely to live a long, healthy, functional life. So eating products of violence is bad for your mind. Eating products of violence is also bad for your physical body, health, and longevity. Similarly, you should understand that what the human body is designed to eat is really it is designed to eat vegetarian food. In the sense, if you look at the teeth that we have, the teeth are closer to that of a herbivore. It is for grinding and chewing food. And barring the incisors, there are no teeth in the mouth which are designed for actually eating flesh. Similarly, if you look at the intestines of a meat eating animal is very different from the intestines of a herbivore. The acid that is contained in a carnivore is so strong because it is designed to actually dissolve and digest both meat and bone. Similarly, the length of the intestine is very short because the end digestive products of meat actually irritate the intestines and they cause bowel cancer. And therefore, the bowel is short, only 3 times the length of the body. Whereas, if you see the cow, the length of the cow's intestine is 12 times the length of the body of the cow because it is meant to for long digestion of vegetarian foodstuffs. The same goes for a human being, which is 8 times the length of the body. It is designed for eating vegetarian food. And when you break the laws of nature, you cannot break the laws of nature. In fact, you can only break yourself against the laws of nature. So the question comes, there are people who say, I can't give up eating meat. What can I do? How should I handle it? This is a very difficult task you're given that you should start eating vegetarian food. So the answer is, of course, you can continue living your life the way you want and need not take any advice from anybody. You need not aspire for spirituality. But if you look and you see, you will understand that there is a huge difference between participating in acts of violence, because that brings violence into your mind, your thoughts. A very interesting example is the example given of Mark Zuckerberg. So Mark Zuckerberg has a Buddhist guru. And Mark Zuckerberg told the Buddhist guru that I have been brought up as a non-vegetarian. I have been eating non-vegetarian foods all my life. I've been eating flesh and I crave to eat flesh. Why are you asking me not to eat flesh? What can I do? What is the solution? What is the means by which I can become free from meat eating? So this Buddhist guru, Zen master that he was, he told him that whenever you have the desire to eat meat, what you should do is you should eat that meat, or you should eat that flesh which you have yourself killed. Because if you yourself are able to kill the meat, then you are fully aware and conscious of the acts of violence you are performing. Then do that, and you will understand. So Mark Zuckerberg began putting up on his Facebook picture of a pig, saying, "This is the pig that I'm going to eat next week." And then he would kill the pig himself, and having killed the pig, then he would cut it up, and then he would eat that meat after cooking it. And because each pig was so big, he would share it with other people. And the same thing happened with other animals that he wanted to kill. And over a period of time, he began to experience and he began to realize what he was actually doing. The problem is people are not expanding their awareness. People who eat meat are reducing their awareness, they're deadening their awareness. Instead of becoming more conscious, because consciousness is divine, they are becoming less conscious. And how are they becoming less conscious? Because somebody else kills the animal, somebody else cuts the animal, somebody else cooks the animal, and somebody else eats the animal. So that if they eat boneless chicken or if they eat boneless meat, they think that it has actually not come from an animal. At some unconscious level, they're satisfying themselves with it. I remember I went to a restaurant with a friend and he said that he wanted Jain chicken. I said, "What is Jain chicken?" So he said, "Jain chicken is boneless chicken. That once the chicken is killed, it is made boneless and then it is mixed in the gravy and then we can hardly see it as chicken." So you are reducing your consciousness of the violence that you are indirectly causing. I told you this in an earlier lecture and I'm going to tell you again that there was a Buddhist student in my medical class who was eating meat. So I asked him to talk to his Buddhist priest. And he came back and he told me that my priest also eats meat. And he says that as long as you don't kill the animal, there is no sin. So I explained to him, how can that be? Because at that time I was looking after the emergency room in a hospital where lots of cases of violence would come, where we had a prisoners ward and we had many gangsters and prisoners who were admitted under us. And they were so grateful for the care that they received that they would come and tell me, "Doctor, you have helped to save our life." Of course, God saves our life, but you have been an instrument in saving our lives. So we'd like to do something for you. If you ever need somebody killed, do let us know. So I shared this with that Buddhist student from Thailand. And I told him that I don't have to kill you myself. I have so many people who are simply dying to kill someone for me. So I just have to point you out, and sure enough, they will come and kill you. Would you say that I am not responsible? So he said, no, no, of course you're responsible. And of course, in the Mahabharata, it is clearly given that one who sells the animal, one who buys the animal, one who kills the animal, one who cuts the animal, one who cooks the animal, yes, and one who even serves the animal, along with the person who eats the animal, all of them are equally involved in the act of bad karma, eating products of violence. Therefore, it's important to understand that if you are on the path of spirituality, if you are on the path of attaining a more peaceful mind, one of the first things you need to do is to stop eating products of violence. You might say, oh, you also take life when you eat vegetarian food. This is not about life. It's impossible to avoid taking life. When you walk on the road, you will trample on insects. You can't avoid taking life. Even those monks who wander around naked in the world with only a face mask to protect themselves from inhaling and killing microorganisms, even they cannot avoid killing life. Killing life is inevitable. It comes naturally. It is inevitable. But certainly don't engage in violence for the sake of pleasuring your tongue. Don't engage in violence for the sake of pleasuring your tongue. Please try to understand that violence engaged while pleasuring your tongue involves you fully in the process of bad karma, and there is no relief for that. Therefore, it's very important to understand that I need to tell you what not to do, not just what to do. There was a saint who said, what you don't do is more important than what you do. What is the use of a tiger who fasts on Ekadashi when he eats a cow on Dwadashi? So fasting on one day and eating meat on the next day doesn't necessarily mean that you are on the spiritual path. So therefore, my friends, it's very important for you to understand that you need to give up eating products of violence. You might think, what about protein? But this is a joke of uneducated people who don't understand that proteins you need to eat in the appropriate manner. For example, to eat a paratha that is loaded with rajma contains weight for weight the same amount and the same quality of protein as the same weight of beef steak. So protein wise, you will not suffer. Certainly, if you eat products of violence, then I am afraid that you will find it difficult to progress in spiritual life because there will be considerable obstacles on the way. You will also find that as you progress and advance in spiritual life, it will become easier and easier and easier to give up the products of violence. And over a period of time, as you advance in spiritual life, that desire for eating products of violence will go away from you. We are actually well beyond our question time. So I will pause here and I will continue the next time. So does anyone have any questions in the last few minutes of our session today? can enter your questions in the chat. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Patram pushpam phalam toyam yo mad bhaktya prayachati tad aham bhakti uparitam ashnami pratat manaha. If you offer me a leaf, a flower, a fruit, a little bit of water, and you offer it to me with love and with devotion, Krishna says, I accept it. There is a question here from Purva. How does one give up eating non-vegetarian food when one has been eating for years? Cold turkey or gradually? What about eggs and fish? Well, of course, the best way to give up eating non-vegetarian food is cold turkey. Because every time you eat it, you increase the craving for it. It's just like you're pouring petrol into a fire and someone asks you, should you stop putting petrol slowly or should you stop putting petrol cold turkey? And the answer is you have to stop putting petrol in the fire immediately because that's when it actually has effect. As long as you're even putting a little bit of petrol on the fire will keep on raging. Vishaya vinavartante niraharasya dehina rasavarjam rasapiyasya param drishtva nivartate. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains that first, when you give up these tastes, the lower tastes, when you give up the enjoyments, lower enjoyments, you will still have the taste for them. The taste will remain. Like when you give up eating meat, the taste for eating meat will remain. But he says, Rasavarjam rasapiyasya param drishpa nivartate. But when you get the higher taste, that higher taste is the taste of God. And when you get that taste of divinity, then the taste of divinity will see to it that the lower taste will fall away. So it's always better to give it up immediately. But of course, it's better to give it up gradually than not at all. What about eggs and what about fish? Let me deal with fish first. Fish actually is the most polluted substance on earth. When the environmental agencies come to examine a piece of land and to understand how much is the pollution there, the first thing they do is they examine the flesh of the fish because most of the pollution enters the water first. And having entered the water, it enters into the fish first. So, mercurial poisons, heavy metals, so many other poisons, they enter into the fish first. As far as eggs are concerned, you have two types of eggs that are fertilized and eggs that are unfertilized. Eggs that are fertilized are obviously you're taking, it's an act of violence because you're preventing it from taking birth. As far as eggs that are unfertilized are concerned, many people consider them to be unfertilized, or eggs that are unfertilized are often considered to be vegetarian. But in actual fact, eggs are also flesh in one way or the other. You can look at it like this, that normally a woman on ovulation produces an ovum which needs fertilization and forms a fetus and an infant, which is then gives birth to an infant. But when that egg of the woman is not fertilized, it is discharged with the lining of the uterus as menses. Same thing with a vegetarian egg. A vegetarian egg is the menses of the chicken, and therefore eating that egg is not considered entirely clean. Now, Kanti Borat has asked that is any vegetarian food also having violence in nature? So, typically the violence that is involved in plucking an apple from a tree is very different from the violence involved in cutting the throat of a goat. So, yes, you could say that plucking an apple from a tree is also an act of violence. But then cutting the throat of a goat is also a much, much greater act of violence. We feel that some violence in the world is inevitable. In fact, Arjun was told to engage in justifiable surgical violence on the battlefield. So, violence, we are not against violence. What we are saying is minimize the violence, reduce the violence, so that you eat products with as little violence as possible. I hope that is clear. Has anyone got any other questions? Hmm? Again, Milind has asked, being vegetarian is eating plants, but don't they also have life? Ahastani sahstanam apadani chatuspadam jivo jivasya jivanam. That those that have claws eat animals that have no claws. One life must live on another. So life survives on life. So just like I said, that yes, products of violence we avoid and we try to minimize the violence that is involved. Similarly, when we are taking life, it is inevitable. You cannot survive in this world without taking life in some form or the other. Even plants have life. But the point is, it is not this. It is not a sin for an animal to eat flesh. For example, if a tiger eats a deer, it is not a sin for the tiger. Because indeed, that is the food that has been given and allotted by God for the tiger. So, similarly, for human beings, you must eat the food that God has allotted for you. So, eating vegetarian food is food that is allocated to you, allotted to you by God. And although you are eating, you're taking life when you eat plants, that is life which is designated for you to eat for maintaining your body. And I will come to more how we can reduce or how we can get rid of the karma even from vegetarian food in the next class. That is what we will cover when we cover in next Thursday. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much. Hari Om, Jai Shri Krishna, Hare Krishna to all of you. And I look forward to seeing you next Thursday.